What's up, Flannelverse? How are we doing today? I am unhappy with the main slate. Was really into the Rams today. That did not work out at all. Cooper Kupp got hurt. The team just did not put up any points on a bad Cardinals defense. Did not love that. How are the rest of you doing? I saw somebody in here. Marco says happy break tonight. This week's slate hurt some. Yeah, me too. Me too, Marco. Same page. Did not go well for me at all playing a lot of Rams today. But let's make it all back tonight. How about that? Let's just make all that money back tonight. I'm going to go position by position, starting with quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, and kickers. And then at the end, I will make some lineups. I'll take some questions. I'll play around with some lineups just to kind of get an idea of the types of lineups that I want to play tonight. We'll take a look at a lot of fantasy points data. We'll take a look at some of the usage data from last week on fantasy points as we go position by position. Of course, we already know some things are going to be different this week because Dameon Pierce is out. That's not a huge factor, but it is a bit of a factor. Changes things up a little bit. But more importantly, Keenan Allen is inactive for this game. So we're going to see things a little bit different tonight than what we saw last week, but we can still get into kind of the lay of the land for this slate. So starting with quarterbacks, we have CJ Stroud and Caleb Williams. Two, I think, adequate. One very good NFL quarterback in CJ Stroud. Caleb Williams, I think, is going to be a very good NFL quarterback. I don't know. Are we worried about Shane Waldron? Are we saw how much JSN did not love playing for him last year. I'm starting to be concerned after last week's output, just really bad for the Bears. Never really running things in motion. I just read that. Seems concerning that it's not a 2024 NFL offense based on last week, but who knows? Maybe that's just getting used to a new offense. I hope that the Bears are going to be okay over time, but for this week, obviously both in play. This is a showdown slate. Quarterbacks on a showdown slate. It's pretty rare that quarterbacks are not very much in play on a showdown slate. So we can talk about how we're going to use them, I think, is the more important discussion with these quarterbacks. And starting with CJ Stroud, doesn't run a whole lot. Rushed for, I think, 100 and some yards last year. So better than some, but really still, 11 yards per game, something like that on the ground. For me, I'm always stacking CJ Stroud no matter where he is in my lineup. And if I have CJ Stroud in the captain spot, I'd like to have multiple pass catching options. Again, because of the scoring dynamics on DraftKings, where the receiver outscores the passer on every passing play. So it's really hard for CJ Stroud to be the optimal captain if he is not spreading the ball around, because he doesn't run at all. He doesn't pick up any points that way. Every point he picks up is through the air. So if he's too focused on one receiver, that receiver is just going to outscore him. They're generally cheaper than he is. I guess Nico Collins is 200 more, but regardless, it's close enough. If he's not spreading the ball around, most likely CJ Stroud is not going to be the optimal captain. So when I have CJ Stroud in the captain spot, I like to have multiple pass catchers from Houston in the flex. Caleb Williams, a bit different. He didn't rush a ton. He had 5 rushing attempts last week. I want to say 15 yards, so not a ton there as far as actual production last week. But he was kind of a runner in college, not like elite, not a top tier rushing quarterback, but he had over 1,000 yards over the course of 3 seasons, 2 seasons where he was close to one season over 400 yards, second season a little bit under 400 yards, and then his senior year he kind of pulled back on the running a bit, but I think he still has it in him to run. So I'm a little bit looser with it with Caleb Williams. I'd say at captain, I want him to be paired up with at least one pass catcher. I still prefer 2 in general, but I think you could do a single stack with Caleb Williams. Hope that he does run a little bit more in this game. And in the flex, I prefer to have him stacked up with one pass catcher in the lineup at least. But I think you can get away with it. If you think maybe he does rush for 40 yards and a touchdown, he can get there without a pass catcher. So I think it is viable to play Caleb Williams without any pass catchers. If I were playing 150 lineups, I don't know that I would require a pass catcher in every lineup with Caleb Williams. But I would want to have a Bears pass catcher in basically any Caleb Williams lineup. And as far as the ownership goes, for these guys, it's interesting because I think it is kind of hard to predict with Caleb Williams just because he is so polarizing. Like, are people going to just say, I don't want to play Caleb Williams? I'm cheering against him. I hope he's a bust, because a lot of people kind of dislike Caleb Williams' persona. I don't think that's going to be a huge factor in DFS. I think he'll still get a good amount of ownership because there are also a lot of players, a lot of fans on the opposite end of that who do really want him to succeed, that are hoping that he is a legit quarterback. So I think that probably he will get a fair amount of ownership. I think it's kind of an interesting spot where there might be some narratives at play affecting how many people want to play Caleb Williams. But ultimately, I think a majority of lineups these days come from people using projections optimizers. So I don't think it's going to be a huge factor. We are probably going to see Caleb Williams come in at over 50% ownership overall, projected around the industry for sub 10% captain ownership. So that is kind of interesting to me. That is one way that I like to play this slate, is a full-on Bears onslaught lineup. Not because I think it's super likely that they are awesome in this game. And again, I'm talking large field GPPs. I want to always set that up at the beginning of the show. I play large field GPPs. It's basically all I play. So all of my analysis is based around large field GPPs. If you're playing smaller field GPPs, you don't want to follow some of the more wilder ideas that I have about how I'm going to play this slate. The unlikely events that I think the field is going to underplay. You don't need to go as deep into it as I do in smaller field GPPs. Obviously, in cash, you don't want to be doing that kind of stuff at all. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody playing large field GPPs with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in the contest. So that's where I like to get different by playing through some weird game scenarios. And I think one that's, it's not the likeliest game scenario, but I think it's well within the range of outcomes, is just playing Caleb Williams in the captain spot, double stacked with multiple pass catchers, no Keenan Allen, so you could do Romo Dunze, obviously you can do DJ Moore, and just hope that he does have a big game here with the spotlight on him. Hope that this is where Caleb Williams shines. We don't have much of a sample size of Caleb Williams in the NFL, so that is one way that I think you can get different on the slate, is to play Caleb Williams a captain, again projected for sub 10% ownership. I'm going to get rid of this Hitler guy. So yeah, play some Caleb Williams is one way that I want to play. You don't have to play it that way, but I think it's a way to get different. That wouldn't be that crazy if nobody would be that shocked if Caleb Williams is just actually a good NFL quarterback, shines with the bright lights on him. So I like the idea of playing some Caleb Williams at captain with multiple stacking partners in the flex. I think it will go under owned by the field in general. But generally, I think that he's a solid play. I want to be upfront. I'm going to be playing it both ways. So I'm going to have some lineups that are like Caleb Williams dominates, is awesome. I will have some lineups the other way as well, where I'm like, okay, Houston defense going to put up, I think that was my bold prediction today in the expert survey, 15 plus fantasy points, and Houston defense is going to be in the optimal lineup. I will have some of those lineups that are just like, the Bears don't do anything, full on Houston onslaught. This game is in Houston. Houston's got a great defense, a great offense. It's well within the range of possibilities that Houston just absolutely dominates this game. So I'm going to be playing it both ways, but I think it'll be unique to play it through the Caleb Williams Bears onslaught. I think that's going to be a build that not a lot of people get to. And yeah, CJ Stroud obviously is going to get a fair amount of ownership. We have Caleb Williams, looks like probably sub 60% Caleb Williams, but pretty close to around 60%. I think I actually like him better in the captain spot. It's kind of rare that I like a quarterback better in the captain spot. It's just a matter of he's not getting much ownership there. And I do think that he has the ability to spread the ball around, put up a big game from the captain spot. And he can run a little bit. So I kind of like the idea of Caleb Williams from the captain spot. Yeah, looks like sub 60% around the industry ownership projections. That seems fine. He's not getting 80%. If he was getting 80%, it would be a fade to me. I think above 50% is probably where he should be on this slate. But I think I'm going to be slightly overweight at captain, slightly underweight in the flex, just because I want to play that kind of unique structure in general of what if the Bears just are awesome with the bright lights on them. And CJ Stroud is going to get a lot more captain ownership, projected for significantly more captain ownership. I think that is also fine. I'm not taking a huge stand there. He's going to get, looks like sub 20% captain ownership for CJ Stroud. I think that's a reasonable amount. I think I'll probably have 10 to 15% CJ Stroud captain lineups. Again, always with multiple pass catchers when I have CJ Stroud at captain. All right, that was pretty quick quarterbacks. I don't think it's all that complicated. We have pretty limited data on the quarterbacks. Again, I'm just hoping at this point, Caleb Williams, number one overall pick, is supposed to be very good, hoping that he can just be good, be what he was expected to be in Houston, live up to the expectations. So that's kind of how I'm playing it. Some Caleb Williams at captain lineups. Before we move on to running backs, this is a good time to remind you, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, would appreciate it. Trying to grow my channel, growing slowly. I didn't throw up the banner here. I don't know. I have not updated it for. Okay, I just put it up. That's totally wrong. Haven't updated it for the numbers. Haven't updated it for the game. So I'll keep that off. But would appreciate any of you subscribing to the channel, trying to grow the channel. Have a lot of great content coming out this week. Tomorrow, Adam and I are going to be back in the morning to break down the Monday Night Football game. I'll be back again in the evening to break down the Monday Night Football game after inactives come out when we have more information. And then same thing on Thursday. So going to be doing a lot of Showdown content. That's all I do on this channel is Showdown content, but I love doing it. I hope you enjoy the analysis. And if you do, would appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. If you want to get notifications when I go live, I only go live when I'm doing Showdown content at this point. So if you want notifications, you can click that notification button. All right, I'll move on to talk about some running backs. All right, and here is where, all right, so we have Joe Mixon, absolute bell cow last week, was used. Here, I'll bring up actually the bell cow report. So this is fantasy points data suite that we're looking at here. By the way, if you want to get access to the data suite, really dig into the data yourself, you can get 25% off using promo code Flannelman. Highly recommend it if you are somebody who really likes digging into the data as I do. Joe Mixon last week, we saw him get 30 carries for Joe Mixon, 39.5% route participation, saw 3 targets, 24.3 expected fantasy points. These are just elite numbers. Bobby Slowick asked about it after the game, and he said, yeah, I think Joe Mixon is one of the few running backs in the league. I'm paraphrasing here. One of the few running backs in the league who can handle this kind of workload. We're going to give it to him. Like we're going to continue leaning on Joe Mixon. So all of this very promising as far as Joe Mixon's usage going forward. Drew, to answer this question, I do a lot of other content. I do content for the main slate on a lot of other channels. So I get paid to do that content. I do this content for free, just for the love of the game. But I get paid to do some main slate content for fantasy points, 4for4, roto grinders. So that's why I don't do that on this channel. So yeah, Joe Mixon, a pretty obvious great play. I was just pulling up the offensive line, defensive line matchups thing here, but I read this thing at the top. This uses 2023 data, so I don't know how useful it's going to be, but I believe I just in passing kind of heard that the Texans offensive line was great in the first week. Like it was over 2 yards before contact in general, that they were just really elite as far as an offensive line goes, the week 1 numbers at least. So we have such little data that, I think that's the reason they don't update this data until 4 weeks into the season. So I'm not really putting too much emphasis on it, but it is worth noting that they were apparently very good last week. Joe Mixon getting elite usage. So everything looking pretty good for Joe Mixon again this week. He is the most expensive player on the slate, I believe, 10,200. I think Nico Collins was 10,000. I think he's the most expensive player on the slate. So that is the one thing to note about Joe Mixon. You can question whether he is the most skillful running back. I'm not sure that I believe in the talent being elite, but he's good enough. If he's going to get 30 carries, he's probably not going to get 30 carries, but if he's going to get 20 plus carries, 20 plus touches, I think he's, a pretty solid play at 10,200 in general. I do think the Bears defense is also pretty good, probably not as good as they looked last week, where they scored multiple touchdowns. They were awesome. But I think that they are going to be a pretty tough defense in general. So that's worth noting. Joe Mixon also going to be pretty highly owned, going to get over 50% ownership. Looking around the industry, everywhere has him projected for over 50% ownership. Pretty significant double-digit captain ownership as well. Again, not like 20%, but double digits. So I think it's probably going to be a light fade for me at captain for Joe Mixon, but I'm undecided there. If he gets that kind of usage, it's I'll think about that more. I think he's a solid enough captain play. As Adam and I have talked about on our shows, it is kind of nice having the running back a captain because you aren't kind of funneled into the same builds as you are when you have quarterbacks, for example. We talked about how if I have CJ Stroud at quarterback, I want to be double, triple stacking with him. But then you are kind of falling into everybody else wanting to do the same thing. So that is a nice thing about having the running back at captain, is not being forced into those lineups where you're duplicated or have just similar lineups where you need, 1v1 outcomes to go your way against a bunch of different opponents. So I like Joe Mixon. I honestly probably not taking a huge stand there on his captain ownership being kind of in the mid-teens range, and in the flex. And he's also getting. I think he will be a light fade for me in the flex, just because he is getting, again, over 50% ownership, maybe over 60% ownership for Joe Mixon. Feels like a lot for a player whose talent I don't really believe in. Coming off a game, again, where he had 30 carries, ran all the routes. Like, I don't know how realistic it is that he can keep up that kind of a workload. Might be a little bit fatigued this week. So I think I will be a little light on Joe Mixon. That probably will be a stand that I take this week. DeAndre Swift, significantly cheaper, only 7,000, doesn't project nearly as well, facing a really tough Houston run defense. I think this is a spot that I am going to, I'm going to fade and cross my fingers. It's kind of scary fading a $7,000 DeAndre Swift. He did have pretty nice usage last week. And when I say fade, I don't mean full fade. I'm going to have some DeAndre Swift, but I imagine I will be a bit light relative to the field on DeAndre Swift. You look at the usage last week, he played 71.7% of snaps. He had 45.5% of the carries, 10 of 14 running back carries. You can see here, but that's just 10 carries. So just like the raw volume was not there for DeAndre Swift, even though he had a good chunk of it for the Bears, ran 48.5% of routes, one target. Ultimately, this is what I care about. Expected fantasy points, 6.5 last week for DeAndre Swift. That was a tough matchup with the Titans. Tough matchup again this week, though. So I don't really believe in the talent with DeAndre Swift. So I don't think I'm going to be playing a ton, even though the price is clearly right for DeAndre Swift. So if you want to play him, if you want to just say, hey, $7,000 is too cheap for a running back getting the bulk of the carries on what should be a very good offense, you can go ahead and play some. I'm not full fading him, but actually let me double check what the actual projected ownership is on DeAndre Swift before I get too deep into this take. Yeah, so looks like sub 50% ownership, maybe even sub 40% ownership for DeAndre Swift. I mean, that's not the worst. I probably won't be too light relative to that. My guess is I get close, like around 25 to 30% ownership on DeAndre Swift. So it's not going to be a huge stand for me, but I do imagine I'm going to be a little bit light on DeAndre Swift just because there are other plays that I like better in this game in general. There are so many great ones. All right. Other running backs. So this is another interesting point to get to here. Let me get back to the other running backs name. So Dameon Pierce, let me actually refresh this because Dameon Pierce has been ruled out. Cam Akers is, I believe, active in this game. I would expect him to come in and play that RB2 role. But let's take a look at it after I pull up the projections here. Move this to Showdown. Yeah, Cam Akers now moves in $200. All right, so that's kind of what I assumed was going to happen, was that he was going to be kind of just take over that Dameon Pierce projection. $200, 2.7 fantasy point projection. I like it. I think that Cam Akers, I think I'm going to be playing some Cam Akers. I think he, it wasn't much of a role. Obviously, with Joe Mixon getting 30 carries last week, there was not much left over for other Texans backs. So don't love that role for, like, if he gets the Dameon Pierce role, 9 snaps, 3 rushing attempts, 0 targets on 5.3% rep participation. None of that is great. Cam Akers, though, I think could come in and play a bigger role, in part because, again, Joe Mixon had 30 carries last week. Yes, Bobby Slowick came out and said, we can give him the rock. Well, we'll continue to feed Joe Mixon. He said that. He probably meant it. It's probably largely true, but also maybe they want to cut back on that workload a little bit, split it up a little bit more a week after giving Joe Mixon 30 carries. So I do think there's like a little bit of potential for more standalone value for Cam Akers than what we saw from Dameon Pierce last week. So that's one thing. But then there's also the contingent upside, 30 carries last week for Joe Mixon. maybe a little bit more likely to get hurt. There's also the potential for a blowout with the Texans, hosting the Bears here. Rookie quarterback, they could just blow out the Bears, in which case Cam Akers could come in garbage time, getting a little bit extra run. So I think there are several outs for Cam Akers, and he's just 200. So I do think that I'm going to have Cam Akers in a good number of my lineups. This is something I'm just thinking through now because I wasn't sure if Dameon Pierce was going to miss. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a big part of my lineups, but as we're getting into it, it's like, yeah, I think that's a pretty solid play. $200 Cam Akers certainly could miss. But all the rumors were that he looked really good in the preseason, looked like prime Cam Akers. Maybe really good is too much. Maybe that's going too far, but like looked good during the preseason, looked like prime Cam Akers. He's 200, has outs to get some playing time. So I do think that he is very much in play. Does still, I think, have a very low floor, but at 200, you can kind of eat the zero. So I do think that I like him better than Roschon Johnson, for example. Yeah, I think Cam Akers is probably my favorite backup quarterback play on the slate, in large part because of that $200 price tag. If he does just vulture a touchdown or like catch 3 passes, he can pay off that price tag pretty easily. So I like Cam Akers. Don't think I'm going to go to Daria Gumbawale. He was in last week. He played a bit. 13 snaps last week. He had 0 rushing attempts. Did run routes on 21% of dropbacks, had 1 target. So that is all promising. I guess he's in play. I prefer Cam Akers to Daria Gumbawale, but yeah, he played enough last week that I think he is in play. You can see here the projection 1.6 at $400. Sure, he could, the same thing that I said about Cam Akers applies to Daria Gumbawale. It doesn't take a lot to pay off $400 if he scores a touchdown, if he has 3 receptions. There are reasons to play Daria Gumbawale as well. Slight preference for Cam Akers for me. I shouldn't say slight. Like Cam Akers, like is going to be kind of a big part of my builds. Not like a huge part because he, again, low floor, but Daria Gumbawale I think is a solid enough bet. Also, Travis Homer was actually the Bears' backup running back who got the most run last week, sort of surprisingly. I think all offseason we were talking about Roschon Johnson versus Khalil Herbert, who's going to be the backup in Chicago. I made a strong bet on Khalil Herbert in best ball. Not feeling so great about that right now. You look at the usage for the Bears last week. It was DeAndre Swift got the bulk of the carries. Travis Homer and Khalil Herbert split the carries here, but Travis Homer 21% of snaps, Khalil Herbert just 11%, and then Travis Homer ran 21% of routes, Khalil Herbert just 6% of routes. So that was kind of shocking because if we look at the history for Travis Homer last year on the Bears, did absolutely nothing. I don't even know if I need to pull this up because I can just tell you I don't think scored a single fantasy point. He was on the Bears all year. Played a total of 6 snaps the entire year. So came out of nowhere last week to play ahead of Khalil Herbert, to play ahead of, I think Roschon Johnson was inactive last week. I don't think that's going to be a thing. I think he's in play because he did play so much last week. You could play some Travis Homer if you want to, but I don't know. That surprised me to see him play 6 snaps all of last year and then come in last week and play ahead of Khalil Herbert, who I think is a talented running back. Roschon Johnson being inactive. I don't know. All of that was pretty surprising to me. I don't know exactly what to make of it. I don't love any of them. I think Cam Akers is probably the better option than any of the Bears backup running backs. But I do think if you wanted to play one, it's probably Travis Homer just based on what we saw last week. But honestly, I don't feel that great about that. I think all of them are, I think it's all kind of up in the air. Who's going to be the backup quarterback, actually get some run there. Sorry, I'm trying to answer. Neil, would you avoid Stroud at MVP on FanDuel with no huge rushing upside? That really is dependent on the ownership because Stroud obviously has huge just fantasy point upside in general. He is looking like he's going to be the chalkiest captain by a pretty significant margin. So I think I probably would be underweight to the field on CJ Stroud at MVP on FanDuel just because he is getting really significant ownership, like nearly 30% projected ownership on CJ Stroud. To me, I'd rather take shots. He projects so well. So obviously the highest projected player in your lineup is going to be put into the MVP spot if you're using an optimizer. I prefer then to avoid playing the highest projected and just assume that somebody else is going to outscore him. Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins. We don't know which one of them is going to have a big game, but I would rather make my bets on the low owned pass catching options, hope that one of them just goes off, outscores the quarterback, and is the captain you need at much lower ownership. So, if I were playing like a single entry, I don't think CJ Stroud would be my captain because I think he's going to be MVP on FanDuel because I think he's going to be super highly owned at MVP. I would rather make my bets on like a Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, DJ Moore, one of these other guys who has the ability to be the highest scoring player on the slate, but isn't going to come in at 30% ish ownership. So that would be, if I were playing single entry, I don't think I would play CJ Stroud as my MVP. All right, back to it. And I did see some very nice comments in chat. Powerbooks, appreciate you. Many of you saying really nice things. I really do appreciate all of the comments. I don't have a guest, so I can't really read them. I have to stick to reading stuff, but I'm kind of browsing, scanning a little bit as I'm going, and I really do appreciate all the kind comments, especially after a very rough main slate for me today. Man, that did not go well. Anybody else? Roschon Johnson in play again. He's active. Looks like 200. You could play some Roschon Johnson if you think he is going to play more than none. Like he can get there pretty easily at 200. Decent pass catching back. I think he's a fine play. But yeah, of all the backup running backs, it would be Cam Akers for me. I think he's the likeliest to step into a big enough role, and he is the cheapest. So all things considered, it would be Cam Akers for me. Actually, I have not looked at projected ownership for Cam Akers, so that will be a factor. So let me actually refresh some things, check projected ownership around the industry on Cam Akers. My assumption is it's going to be single digit ownership on Cam Akers. That's part of the appeal there. But let me double check that is actually correct. At least it's projected to be correct. Yeah, looks like he's projected for next to zero ownership, which is, kind of the assumption that I was making. And that's why I like him, is because I was assuming he's going to be very low owned and he's min priced, and it wouldn't take much to pay off his price tag. So all those things factored in together, I think Cam Akers is a very strong large field GPP play. Pacheco down, like hurt. Is he seriously hurt? That's a huge bummer if that is true. All right, that's going to do it for running backs. I will move on to wide receivers. All right. DJ Moore, now the top projected receiver on the slate with Keenan Allen inactive for this game. Just expected to get that much more usage. Not a huge shock there. I wasn't sure if he was going to flip Nico Collins in terms of projection, but he's 9,000, projects slightly better than Nico Collins. Tough matchup, obviously, with Houston. I think they're going to be a tough defense all year. But DJ Moore he's always been kind of a boom bust option. Like he needs to score touchdowns to score fantasy points. He's not typically going to be like a PPR scam kind of guy. He's not going to get there on 10 receptions in a game. You need him to put up a significant number of yards, a touchdown or two, all that kind of stuff. So I think DJ Moore, on a showdown slate, strong play, but again, boomer bust. It kind of all comes back to what's the ownership going to be? What are the odds that he is going to hit in a big way, have that long touchdown? I kind of suspect that the ownership is going to be pretty strong on DJ Moore, and that's kind of what I'm seeing, that he's, again, double-digit captain ownership, going to be around 50% ownership overall. At that point, I think it's fine. Sub 50% projected ownership overall, I think is actually fine on DJ Moore. Wouldn't be that shocking to me if he does get steamed up a little bit more. He's a guy that we've seen have such monster games so many times. I think people always remember the game against the Commanders last year. I think it was last year. I think people remember like the long touchdowns for DJ Moore. You can just envision it. The usage is going to be there with no Keenan Allen. But you have to remember that he didn't have Keenan Allen there last year either. He's had opportunities as the clear alpha. He's the clear alpha here, but he can still miss as a clear alpha. But at sub 50% ownership, I think that is fine. I think I'll probably be pretty close to the field on DJ Moore, not taking a huge stand there. I do like him as a captain for that reason, because he has that boom bust to his game, where it's like he's either going to score a long touchdown and be the nuts, or he could just have 6 receptions for 60 yards and, not be that great. I think that DJ Moore is a very strong captain play, very strong MVP play on FanDuel as well. So I think I prefer him in the captains, but I think he's a fine flex option as well. He clearly has that big play upside. Haven't really seen him connect in a big way with Caleb Williams yet. So, but you can't really wait on it. This is week 2. I have to hope that's going to happen. So I think I'm not going to be far off from the field on DJ Moore. That's actually an interesting FanDuel one as well. Let me look at the captain ownership there. Okay, he is looking like he's going to get probably double-digit ownership on FanDuel. I was hoping that he was going to be lower. That's kind of why I gravitated more towards those Texans receivers, because it's kind of harder to figure out the pecking order there, so that people then will be more inclined to just play DJ Moore in the captain spot, because he's the clear wide receiver 1 on the Bears. So I think people just want to play that wide receiver 1. They're going to go to DJ Moore. I think that the Texans guys are also very strong, though, in the MVP spot there. Okay. Anthony, yes, I like Dell quite a bit for MVP on FanDuel. I also think on FanDuel, because there is no salary multiplier, you sometimes, if you just play the cheaper guys in the MVP spot, they end up going a little bit lower owned in the MVP spot, because everybody kind of knows, okay, there's no salary multiplier. You can play whoever you want. I want to play a highly projected guy. So then I think as a result, you end up getting kind of lower ownership sometimes on those guys that are a little bit lower in the salary list. People just don't scroll down that far in the MVP. So I do think Tank Dell probably going a little bit under-owned in the MVP spot, and he's projected to be. So I do like Tank Dell quite a bit on FanDuel as the MVP. But I'll continue. So DJ Moore, and I can pull up receiving stats for the Bears last week, show you the usage. And again, they had Keenan Allen, so that will change things a bit, but probably doesn't affect. 90.9% route participation for DJ Moore, led the team by a significant margin, saw 8 targets. He was the clear alpha last week, 27.6% target share, actually tied Keenan Allen with the target share. So I do think it helps him to not have Keenan Allen there, the other target earner for the Bears. I like it. Again, I think DJ Moore, strong play, strong captain play, hard to argue too much with it. He's going to have the usage. The one downside is we haven't really seen him hit in a big way with Caleb Williams yet. And I guess 2 downsides, and then tough matchup with the Texans. Maybe they try to take him away. Now that he is the very clear number 1 receiver, maybe they double him up. Maybe they change the way they play him a little bit. Going down the Bears receivers here, I actually really like Rome Odunze. Doesn't project extremely well point per dollar, as you can see here. Just 10 fantasy point projection, 6,400. And you look at the advanced receiving from last week, he was just 69.7% route participation, only saw 3 targets. He was also banged up, and now I'm forgetting. I wrote it up earlier and I knew what it was, and now I'm forgetting what the actual ailment was. When the reason that he was questionable coming in today. But either way, he's playing in this game. I think he's going to get extra usage with no Keenan Allen there. And he's also a huge talent. I really like Rome Odunze as a talent. So I think he's a pretty great play on this slate at low ownership at a low cost. Actually, let me double check the ownership. It was low last I checked, but I do want to, looking like pretty low ownership, sub 30%. Double checking all my sources. Yeah, everywhere has him around a quarter of the field playing Rome Odunze. I think at this price, as the pretty clear number 2 receiver on the Bears, I really like it. I'm going to play a good amount of Rome Odunze. Hope that he does get a bigger target share, because again, we're taking 8 targets. A 27.6% target share for Keenan Allen last week is being taken out of the lineup. The natural next place for that to go would be Rome Odunze. So I'm into it. I like Rome Odunze quite a bit. I will be well over the field on 25% Rome Odunze, where we have him around 25%. Yeah, Marco says he's listed at 24%. Yeah, he's coming in very low owned. I'm looking at a couple different places around the industry. Very low projected ownership on Rome Odunze. I think he's talented. I think he's a good bet to get significant volume here. So I like it. I think that is a play that I will get to. I think the options beyond Rome Odunze is where it gets pretty complicated. Tyler Scott out last week, so we didn't get to kind of see where he is in the pecking order with DeAndre Carter, with Velus Jones. Velus Jones is active, right? I was kind of expecting him to be inactive. Let me refresh this. Now I'm blanking on whether I saw him on the inactives. I looked it up before we started, but let me pull that up again on whether Velus Jones is actually inactive for this game. Give me 1 minute here. Inactive. Okay, we have Velus Jones in it. Okay, thank you guys for answering. I should always just read chat instead of trying to look it up myself. Yeah, so we have Velus Jones inactive. He was active last week. Pretty bad mistake on special teams with Velus Jones. So as expected, is inactive on this one. So it kind of just comes down to Tyler Scott, DeAndre Carter being the two that I think are most likely to have a role beyond DJ Moore and Romo Dunze. And as you can see here, Tyler Scott projects better and he's cheaper. I think that that's probably a good bet that Tyler Scott would be third in line. I think he's a really strong play. Again, somebody's going to get targets there. Probably somebody's going to get targets beyond the big two. Tyler Scott as the best projected play of the group, and just 600, probably a pretty good bet. And now let me look at ownership for Tyler Scott. Looking like sub 10% ownership on Tyler Scott. That seems pretty reasonable. Not taking a huge stand there. Yeah, everywhere I look, looks like he's getting single digit ownership. So I like to play. I think he's a solid bet. Looks like some other places have DeAndre Carter actually projected better. So, okay, my instinct is correct. I don't have a great read on which one is going to project better. And you look around the industry, they do project them differently. Who is the lead between DeAndre Carter and Tyler Scott? Hey, what's up, Pat? Good to see you. Chiefs just won by a field goal. That's kind of disappointing. Would have been fun to see a Bengals upset. I don't really care that much. But an upset's always fun. I think both are in play. Tyler Scott and DeAndre Carter coming in at low ownership. I think it's kind of an unknown situation. Again, look at multiple different projection sources around the industry. They all have them projected slightly differently. They have the ownerships slightly different as a result of their own projections being different. But I think both fairly strong plays at, max 10%, 12% ownership is kind of the max projection I've seen for ownership of either of them. I think Tyler Scott probably my slightly preferred bet of the two, but I think that they're kind of similar. It's kind of a big unknown. We haven't really seen how they want to play it in Chicago because Tyler Scott was out last week. Keenan Allen was in, Velus Jones was in. So we can't read too much into the data from last week. It's all kind of just guessing. Didn't really get a great indication from any beat reporters or anything like that. But I think Tyler Scott probably the best bet, and then DeAndre Carter another solid bet for the Bears wide receivers. They're all pretty unlikely. The targets are gonna funnel mostly to DJ Moore and Romo Dunze. So it's kind of like, is one of these guys going to score a touchdown or have 5 receptions? It's possible. I think that they're solid enough plays at low ownership. I like both, I should say. I like both Tyler Scott and DeAndre Carter as low owned bets with low salaries, upside relative to their side. I think that they're both solid plays. I think I'll probably end up double digit ownership on both of them. But I honestly don't have a great take on which of them. I'm not taking a stand on one versus the other. My slight preference is Tyler Scott just because he is cheaper, easier to pay off that price tag. And I think that it's, kind of a coin flip which one of them actually comes in and has the bigger role for the Bears. All right. And then Texans, we can take a look at the Texans usage from last week because it is the same players. So this is a bit easier with the Texans. Nico Collins led in terms of routes, 86.8% route participation, 7 targets for Nico Collins. I think generally considered the wide receiver one. I think that I consider Nico Collins to be the wide receiver one for the Texans. Very strong bet. Obviously, also the most expensive of the group. I think the price tag is fair on Nico Collins. I think that he has pretty huge upside. I think that he is CJ Stroud's favorite target. I like him. I think that he is one of the best bets on the slate. And looking at ownership, he is also the one that is getting the most ownership of these Texans guys. And honestly, I think that they all have pretty it's well within the range of outcomes for all 3 of the main Texans receivers to have a blow up game. So I'm leaning into the lower owned captains. I will have some Nico Collins at captain as well. I think he has just huge upside. Love the connection with CJ Stroud. Hard to argue with Nico Collins, but he is coming in at, close to 50% ownership at a pretty big price tag. I think I am probably going to be slightly light on Nico Collins just because I am going to be playing it more through Tank Dell. So I guess let's talk about Diggs first. So Diggs, you look at his numbers. So projected for just 13.5 fantasy points. This kind of surprised me to see Diggs come in lower projected than Tank Dell. He's also 2,000 more expensive than Tank Dell. I would like it if he were going to come in at low ownership. I'm not really sure that he's going to come in at low ownership. And I should pull up ownership on Diggs. He's actually projected for pretty low captain ownership, which is intriguing because we saw him targeted twice in the red zone last week. He scored 2 touchdowns on those targets. So really nice usage in terms of expected fantasy points. To be targeted in the end zone is great. And I can pull up the expected fantasy points last week. It was right there at wait, that can't be right. 13 fantasy points when he was targeted twice. Maybe it is. He scored 21.9 fantasy points, scoring 2 touchdowns in that game. I guess maybe that is right because you don't expect him to score every time he's targeted. So I guess it makes sense that his expected fantasy points would be lower than his actual fantasy points. But the one thing that isn't factored in, won't be factored in for expected fantasy points is, and I'm just straight from a Ben Gretsch tweet. So Ben Gretsch watched the film and his takeaway was, although Stephon Diggs' ADOT was super low, like you look at the ADOT and it's not super promising. Sorry, I have to move this. The ADOT for Stephon Diggs last week was 1.3 yards. He had 8 total air yards on 6 targets. That is insanely low. You don't see a ton of upside in that, just looking at the ADOT. But what that doesn't factor in is his full route tree. And according to Ben Gretsch, he was running a full route tree. Like he did take, some routes were down the field. He just didn't get targeted on those routes. So then the air yards, he doesn't accumulate air yards for running down the field, but it is within his route tree. We've seen him historically. He runs a full route tree. He can run down the field. So I'm not too concerned about the lack of air yards in this game. I think that he will hit on some long downfield plays as well. So I like Diggs if he's going to come in at low ownership. But again, he's projected for, actually, I like the captain play. I think he's projected for around 5% captain ownership around the industry. To me, that is pretty strong bet for Stephon Diggs. I'll take that. Okay, slightly more than 5% around the industry, but sub 10% around the industry in the captain spot. It's kind of a pay up to be contrarian, sort of, just because he projects worse than Tank Dell, and Tank Dell is 2,000 cheaper. I think it's a strong bet, just as a pay up to be contrarian. Not taking a huge stand there. I will say, how much do you win in Showdown tonight? Negative $2,400. I'm sorry, Crutches, but I'll be right there with you. We're all just going to lose our money tonight. No, we're going to win it all. We're going to win all the monies tonight. This is our night. We're going to split it. We're each going to win $70,000. Everybody watching the stream, I guess we can't all split, but we're going to win big tonight. Tank Dell is the one that I like the best, just because of the price tag. This is actually pretty surprising to see the 81.6% route participation. You kind of got the impression in the preseason, or I should say, I got the impression during the preseason, it was going to be more of a split between Collins, Diggs, and then Dell, because it was going to be Collins and Diggs starting in 2 wide receiver sets. Dell just going to come in when they have a third receiver in there. Pretty promising to see that he only ran 2 less routes than Diggs and Collins last week. Saw tied for the team eye with 7 targets. All of that really promising to me for Tank Dell. We know he has that huge play upside, and he's the cheapest by a significant margin, 7,400 for Tank Dell. Sign me up for that. I'm really into Tank Dell. Now, the ownership, again, is a factor. But again, you look at captain projected ownership, looks like it's sub 10% around the industry. It was lower in the day. I have to say, when I was looking earlier, it was looking even better for Tank Dell, just looking like he was going to go completely overlooked. Looks like the projections have adjusted over the course of the day. So disappointed in that, but still, I like the play. He's still coming in at projected sub 50% ownership, despite a great price tag. Actually, the captain ownership on this other site has him over 20%. So it looks like the hope that he was going to be a low owned captain, looks like that the captain projected ownership is pretty significantly different depending on where you look on Tank Dell. So that is worth noting. There is a greater than 10% difference depending on where you look for captain ownership on Tank Dell. Oh no, I'm sorry. I was reading this. All right. I read this completely wrong. I was reading projection and not ownership. Yes, he is sub 10% everywhere. So that holds. Thank God, because I really want to play Tank Dell at sub 10% ownership at captain where he's not price prohibitive. He's 7,400 in the flex. Really, really solid play, I think, at relatively low ownership at captain. Allows you to do a lot with the rest of your lineup. So really like Tank Dell in the captain spot. Beyond those three for Houston, Xavier Hutchinson, was out there a little bit last week. I don't think I'm going to go to any of the other receivers beyond the big three for the Texans. Looking at the numbers from last week, you had just a huge drop off. So it's the three big receivers, Dalton Schultz, and then you drop down to 24% route share for Brevin Jordan last week. So as far as the receivers go, Xavier Hutchinson, just 3 total routes last week. Robert Woods, 1 total route. Doesn't instill a lot of confidence in me. You can go there. They're just you're kind of betting on, he gets out there for a couple plays and happens to score a touchdown on one of those plays, or maybe there's a blowout. They come in at the end with the backup quarterback. That can happen sometimes. There are outs there, but it's a relatively thin play. It's not like they're running 50% of the routes and they're going to have opportunities. It's more of okay, there are scenarios where they could get in there and pay off the price tag. Not my favorite bets for Showdown. I think that there are other bets that I like better. So I don't think I'm going to be going to Xavier Hutchinson, John Mechie, Robert Woods, any of those guys. I will go elsewhere for my low-owned, inexpensive plays. All right, I think I covered all of the receivers, so I will move us on to tight ends and take a sip of my beer. Let me refresh this. It's good. It's like water. I'm drinking Coors Light tonight. I didn't realize I'm out of my good beers. I ran out of my fancy Wisconsin beer. So now I'm just drinking Coors Light. That's all I have left. All right. And I got to move this back to Showdown. Dalton Schultz, top projected tight end of the slate. It's worth noting he was questionable with a knee injury. There were reports at one point that he was very unlikely to play. I kind of leaned into him not playing in some of my battle royale stuff. So RIP to that stuff. Yeah, spotted cow is the fancy Wisconsin. It's not actually fancy. You can get it in gas stations everywhere in Wisconsin, but it's good. Dalton Schultz is the top projected tight end on the slate. As you saw when we looked at the receiving data, he was out there on 76% of routes last week. Actually, if you look at these two, Dalton Schultz, Brevin Jordan, I don't know if this is just a coincidence, but they totaled 100% route share for the Texans last week. I thought that was kind of interesting that those two tight ends added up to 100% route share. But really, really strong route participation for Dalton Schultz. Saw 3 targets in a great offense. You can clearly see the case for Dalton Schultz. Relatively inexpensive here at 5,600. I mean, 7.1 projection for 5,600, actually a little bit too expensive, but you can see how it gets there. If he scores a touchdown, has 4 receptions for 40 yards, you probably want Dalton Schultz in your lineup. So I think he's a fine play. It really comes down to ownership then for me, when I think, you can see it happening. You got to gauge based on what the field is doing, and Dalton Schultz, I'm looking it up. Yeah, looking like pretty reasonable ownership on Dalton Schultz. I think of the starting tight ends, I mean, I definitely like him significantly better than Cole Kmet, who looks not unplayable, but pretty close to unplayable to me. He's the closest in terms of price tag to Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz has a real role on the Texans. So I think he's a fine bet for like kind of low ownership. Could pay off, not the likeliest scenario. Let me ban this user. All right. Sorry, getting some bots here. I think Dalton Schultz a strong enough play, not somebody I'm taking a huge stand on. I like that he's sub 20% ownership. You can see how he gets there. He was pretty good last year, so I think he's a fine play. Gerald Everett, the more interesting one, because everybody kind of thought up until the preseason, we kind of thought Cole Kmet was going to be the starting tight end. Gerald Everett just kind of there as the backup tight end. Kind of became clear during the preseason that wasn't really the case. It was going to be more of a split than we thought. And then we look at last week, it was not even that. It was more the Gerald Everett show last week for the Bears. 57.6% route participation for Gerald Everett to 27.3 for Cole Kmet. They each only saw one target, so that's not particularly promising. But given that Gerald Everett got the bulk of the route participation last week, he should have the most opportunities of the Bears tight ends, and he's coming in at just 2,400, relatively inexpensive for the role he has on the Bears. Projects 4.2 fantasy points. Basically, you're counting on a touchdown. I mean, Gerald Everett has some skills. Like he could just put up a bunch of yards. He's a relatively fast tight end. So I think you could get there even without a touchdown, but generally probably not going to be super involved. Maybe I guess now that I'm saying this, I'm like, well, without Keenan Allen there, maybe he's the one. Maybe he's the one that just gets the more usage. So I do like Gerald Everett quite a bit. I think that he is a strong bet at 2,400. And then again, once again, looking at the ownership is not there on Gerald Everett. So yeah, the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm talking myself into Gerald Everett as a pretty strong play. He is the tight end who's going to get the most usage, the most opportunities for the Bears, and might get a little bit more with Keenan Allen inactive today. So I like Gerald Everett quite a bit. Actually, did I refresh this? I don't remember if I refreshed it to see. Maybe the projection changes a little bit on Gerald Everett. Let me look around the industry a bit. Yeah, it doesn't project extremely well. The ownership coming in pretty low. I like it. I'm into it. Sub 10% ownership on a 2,400 Gerald Everett. Yeah, I think that is a very strong bet with a potential like bigger workload because Keenan Allen is out. Sign me up for some Gerald Everett. He was not the tight end that I planned to talk about. Cole Kmet, I think I'm fading Cole Kmet. You can make the case for, he's going to be super low owned, but I think the usage is just not there for $5,000. I think this is kind of a Mike Williams situation. He's not limited, but he's not their top tight end. Based on last week, it seemed Gerald Everett is the Bears' top tight end. So I think 5,000 just too expensive for a guy who only ran 27% route participation last week, one target. I think 5,000 is just too expensive for the role. Large field tournaments, like he's in play. You could play Cole Kmet if you wanted to. I think I'm fading him. Just don't. I think there are other plays I like better. Brevin Jordan is the one that I wanted to talk about. And now that we've talked about Cole Kmet, now we've talked about Gerald Everett. I think Gerald Everett might just be the objectively better play, but I'll give you the case for Brevin Jordan anyway, because he was the one that I was planning on talking about. Just 1,600, 3.4 fantasy point projection. And he actually had a pretty decent role last week. Not like a huge role, but for this price tag, good enough. Brevin Jordan, 23.7% route participation. So just, pretty close to where Cole Kmet was, but he's significantly cheaper than Cole Kmet. Also saw 2 targets in that game. But what I really like about Brevin Jordan is we do have Dalton Schultz coming in. It's all the way they've been talking about is he's going to try to play. He's going to give it a go today. It's not, he's feeling great. He's ready to go. He's going to try to play through it. So I do think that there are scenarios where Dalton Schultz goes out there, tries to play, and just isn't himself, aggravates the injury, et cetera, et cetera. There are ways for it to go south for Dalton Schultz. And then Brevin Jordan, if he actually does get some run, he's kind of a big play upside kind of guy. Now, I don't know if I would have that opinion if not for that 70-yard touchdown, 73-yard touchdown, whatever it was in the playoffs last year. I looked it up because I was curious. I was like, man, he looked pretty fast to me on that play. 20.3 miles per hour. It was the third fastest time that a tight end logged last year, according to Next Gen Stats. I actually read a quote that he says, look at my YouTube. When I was a kid growing up, I was always a running back. So he is kind of a speedster for a tight end. I thought that was kind of promising. So if he does just take on a little bit of a bigger role, gets up to 40% route participation, I would love that for Brevin Jordan. I think he has that big play upside. He's cheap enough. So at relatively low ownership, I think he's a really interesting play. Honestly, these offenses are generally pretty condensed, so it's kind of hard to find great plays. But I think these tight ends are kind of just it. They're coming in relatively low ownership, should have opportunities. Brevin Jordan, projected for sub 10% ownership. I like him as just a GPP large field upside play, just because we've seen the speed, we've seen him. He has the ability to break open a big play. Should have had. If he just has the opportunities he had last week, stays in exactly that same role where he gets 24% of route participation, I think at this price tag, he could score a touchdown and pay off his price tag just fine. Like, it's fine if he has that role. He is an okay play at ownership, but then I think he has the added, upside of, well, what if Dalton Schultz is limited? He came in limited. All of the, quotes around him don't really give me full confidence, like that he's for sure going to be good to go with his regular workload. So all of that leads me to I like Brevin Jordan at low ownership. Probably going to be my biggest stand on the slate. I think Gerald Everett, now that we've talked about it, I kind of have to take it back a little bit. I think Gerald Everett might be the slightly better play because he's not getting much ownership either, but I still like Brevin Jordan quite a bit for his projected ownership. All right, are we through all the tight ends here? I think we are. I think we're through all of the tight ends. We can move on to kickers and defenses. And then we'll take some questions, build some lineups. So kickers and defenses, I think, are once again very strong plays. These are both very good defenses. Although Sims want, I don't love that. If the Sims are telling you to jam Gerald, that might bring his ownership up a bit. But I think there's a reason. I think they should tell you to jam Gerald at low projected ownership. Kickers and defenses, I think Houston defense feels kind of obvious, like it is. I talked about wanting to play it through. I think Caleb, what if he does just shine under the bright lights? But then there's the other side of it. I said I'm going to play it both ways. That's true, because what if he doesn't? What if he's a rookie? He's not ready for this kind of spotlight. Sunday Night Football, everybody watching. I mean, he probably is. He played. He was a big name in college. Everybody's watching him in college, so I think he's probably ready. But regardless, it's a really tough spot for Caleb Williams, just a really tough Houston defense in Houston. All of this stuff makes it a really tough game for a rookie quarterback to come in. So I do like the idea of playing a good amount of the Houston defense in general. I think that is they're going to go, a little bit under-owned relative to where they should be. And I don't want to just say this without looking. Okay, actually, they're pretty highly owned. Looks like in the utility spot. Houston defense very low owned in the captain spot. So now I have to decide: do I want to play them in the captain spot? Looks like everybody had kind of that same idea of, well, why not just play the Texans defense against the rookie with the big spotlight on him? Looks like the field is there with me, so I don't love that. But captain, I think that I'll probably be above weight to the field at captain. Looks like he's coming in around 2% captain ownership. When I say I'll be above weight to the field, I'll probably have 5% Houston defense at captain. I think that they are a strong way to play it. I know a lot of people hate the defense at captain spot. They think they're donkey lineups, and then you see them win all the time. So I don't know why people still think that. I think that defenses at captain are totally fine. But again, the one note I always give: if you play a kicker at captain, defense at captain, you don't want to use your full salary cap. It's sort of the pros and cons of it is you see it like in the Sims. It always shows up as a it wins more than people play. Like the optimal lineup is going to have the kickers and defenses in the captain spot more than how the field plays it. But then on the other hand, that's because those lineups are the ones where you use the full salary cap because they allow you to play all of the studs. But then those lineups end up being duped. So it is kind of I go back and forth on, okay, the Sims like it because it allows you to play all of the studs. And if they just do well enough to allow you to play all the studs, it can show up as a lineup that wins more than the field plays it. But then you run into more deep dupes a lot of the time than you want to. My conclusion is I still would rather leave salary on the table, avoid those dupes, even though that would show up optimal less frequently. I think that is, if I'm playing a kicker or a defense at captain, I'm trying to avoid major dupes. So I'm going to leave some salary on the table. That would be my recommendation. But yeah, I like the kickers and defenses on the slate, particularly Texans, but they look like the field is going to be on there. So let me take a look at the Bears defense, also a really strong defense and coming in at significantly lower ownership. So I think Bears defense is actually a pretty strong play also at like low teen ownership, and they're only 3,000. Honestly, I think the Bears are a pretty strong play. I understand not wanting to play a defense against CJ Stroud. He's been so good. But at this kind of ownership, you can play defense. Like plays get broken up all the time. One of the receivers just knocks it up in the air and a defensive back takes it in for a touchdown. Like it's not always the quarterback's fault when plays go wrong for the offense. So I think even if you don't want to make a bet against CJ Stroud, it's still fine to play a $3,000 Bears defense. They still will have some opportunities there. So I do like playing some of the Bears defense at low ownership also. And then the kickers, you see it. I think it's actually similar to what we saw with the Niners the other week, where Jake Moody put up 26 fantasy points or whatever, where it's like they have a really good offense, they're facing a really good defense. sometimes the end result is they get it down, to the other side of the field, and then the defense is stout enough to keep them out of the end zone. Could happen here. Maybe a benefit to the kicker that they are playing a really tough defense, tough to get it into the end zone. So I do like Fairbairn in particular. I'm blanking on what the Bears kicker's name is, but either way, I like both the kickers. I like both the defenses in this game. I think are generally they go under-owned on showdown slates. I think that is going to be the case on this slate as well. Okay. Cairo Santos is Bears kicker. Yeah. Also a strong play. Okay. Would you play defense or kicker at MVP on FanDuel? It's a thinner bet on FanDuel because of the lack of salary multiplier. So you need them to be, again, your highest scoring player in your lineup. I don't think I would on FanDuel. Feels, I don't know, because we did see the big Jake Moody game. I think it's within maybe Fairbairn. I would consider it. I think the Texans guys, I would consider it. I don't like it. It's harder for me to envision the Bears defense or kicker being the highest scoring player on the slate. So you could, I think Fairbairn probably fine to play in the MVP spot, but it's not gonna be something that wins all that often. The field isn't going to be there, so it'll be unique. But you really have to hope for kind of a sloppy game if you play a kicker or defense in the MVP on FanDuel. If you're playing Dell in the MVP, should I not have another Texans wide receiver in the lineup? I think you could have another Texans wide receiver in the lineup. It's certainly viable that Dell puts up 102 touchdowns, something like that. But then Nico Collins also has a touchdown and 60 yards and is in the optimal. I think it's totally fine to play one. I don't know that I want to play more than one if I have Dell in there, because at that point you're thinking, is he going to outscore CJ Stroud? It gets a little bit thinner, but yeah, I think you can play at least one more Texans receiver in the lineup with Dell at MVP on FanDuel. All right, I'm answering questions now, so I will move this to questions and lineups. Favorite low owned play of the slate would be, I guess, Gerald Everett. I mean, just looking at it, looks like he's getting pretty low ownership and looks like a really strong play. I think that there is some possibility that he ends up higher. I mean, man, that's FanDuel. So I will say, I since I said I would talk about FanDuel a little bit, some of these plays that get low ownership on DraftKings get even lower ownership on FanDuel. And I often think that they're actually better plays on FanDuel because DraftKings is PPR. They do now have the 100-point bonuses and stuff, so it's a little bit less true, but still largely true. Because DraftKings is PPR, you generally, it's harder for a one-off touchdown for a guy who doesn't get a ton of volume. It's harder for them to catch the guy on DraftKings who just has 8 receptions, like Cooper Kupp on a slate. If he has 8 receptions for 40 yards, he already has 12 points. Well, just one touchdown for 40 yards isn't going to catch them on DraftKings because it's PPR. So it's harder to catch the studs on DraftKings. Whereas on FanDuel, just one touchdown for a Gerald Everett could pretty easily outscore, DJ Moore, who has 6 receptions for 60 yards. That's just 9 fantasy points. Now you get a 140-yard touchdown for Gerald Everett, outscores that, whereas on DraftKings it doesn't. So there is a little bit of a different dynamic where it's easier for the players who don't get a ton of volume to outscore the players who do get volume on FanDuel because it isn't full PPR. So I do like going to some of those plays, and they go lower owned because you only get to play 5. It's easier to fit in the studs, et cetera, et cetera. So you end up getting the guys that nobody wants to play at really low ownership on FanDuel, and that would be guys like Gerald Everett. Looks like he's coming in at fairly low ownership on FanDuel. Brevin Jordan certainly going to get very, very low ownership on FanDuel. Even Cam Akers, I think is in play there at really, really low ownership. So sometimes I kind of like those guys better, and the field likes them worse on FanDuel. Going to those guys who are just, they're not going to get a ton of volume. You're kind of reliant on a touchdown, even more so on FanDuel, but I like them better as a result. One big play can outscore the studs. All right. Oh, okay. So Baldy says there was a tweet a little bit ago about the Bears planning to increase Komet's role. I don't love hearing that. So I guess that makes me like Brevin Jordan that much better. You know where that tweet is? I'd like to read it if you happen to have it, Baldy. Maybe I have a notification about it. All right, I'm checking Twitter real quick to see if I can find this tweet in any of my notifications. I don't think I'm seeing anything. I'll search Komet real quick. All right, I'm not seeing it immediately. Oh, Chris Emma, 51 minutes ago. The Bears plan to increase Cole Kmet's role after underutilizing him in the opener. Oh man, that does complicate things a little bit. It felt like things were just completely over for Kmet. Here, I'll post the link if any of you want to read it and think about Cole Kmet a little bit more. Felt like a really easy fade when he's not getting any kind of ownership, but that makes it tougher, and it also makes it tougher because who knows what to make of them saying they want to give him a little bit more of a role. All right. Hate that. Yeah. Thanks, Baldy. Appreciate you finding that for me. That does. Man, I was so confident in my Cole Kmet fade, and now they're saying they want to use him a little bit more. Bears believe tight end Cole Kmet is one of the premier players at his position in the NFL. They've also rewarded him as such, signing him to a lucrative $50 million contract extension last year. All that is true. Yeah, I think I believe it that they probably do want to get him a little bit more involved. As long as they don't get him super involved, I still think it's going to be a fade for me, but I'm not as confident. I'll just be honest with you. That is kind of what I'm assuming. Yeah. I assume it's from the presser coach speak posted thing. Okay. Yeah, it is just a little bit that I've seen here. Looks pretty vague. Maybe it's true. They paid him. Maybe they want to get him a little bit more involved, but I think it's still going to be largely a fade for me on Cole Kmet. I still think that I don't think they're going to cut out Gerald Everett either. Like they use him quite a bit because I think they like Gerald Everett. Maybe it gets more involved. Maybe he's the one that benefits from Keenan Allen being out. We talk about all these other receivers. Maybe they do more 2 tight end sets. That could be the case as well. Yeah. Thunder, where's the flannel? It's super hot in Minnesota right now. So it's next to me. It's over there. There are plenty of flannels near me, but I'm not wearing any at the moment besides my underwear. Obviously, my flannel thong. I'm wearing that one. All right. Should I try to make some lineups? Any other questions? I guess I'll check, see if I didn't miss any other questions. Would you play both defenses in the same line with Fairbairn at captain on DraftKings? Yeah, I think at that point you can play whoever else you want in the lineup. Probably. I don't know that I would strongly recommend that. That seems like a little bit too much. So I don't think I would. I guess that the answer is no. I don't think I would. I think that you could if you want to play for just a super gross game. It's possible with these 2 very good defenses, but it's not my favorite way to play it. Oh, what's up, Nezzy? Thoughts on 2 to 4 Bears with Moore at captain? So Moore at captain, you throw Caleb in there. I think that's fine. There, you've got some cheap Bears. You've got Everett. Yeah, I think you can play 2 to 4 Bears with Moore at captain just fine. No issue with that. On FanDuel, what do you have for Scott ownership? So yeah, he's a good example of one of those guys who nobody's going to want to play on FanDuel. Let me double check that. Guessing it's going to be very, very low. And it is, in fact, very, very low on FanDuel. 1 sec, let me double check. Yeah, you're looking at sub 5% for sure on Tyler Scott on FanDuel. So I think that's the best answer I can give you is what he's projecting for. So I think that's a strong bet for sure. I'm interacting with chat right now. I'm trying to. It's I'm trying to do multiple things, but yeah, I'm trying to interact with chat. Don't know if I missed some chatter here, but I'm trying to. All right, I'll pull up a lineup here and see what some lineups look like. I have not been hand building yet. I have only made lineups so far with an optimizer. Made some today before the show, so I don't get don't miss out this time. All right, so let's go for Showdown Sunday night. draft a team. All right, so I talked about liking Tank Dell at captain quite a bit. I think that is, let's start with one of those builds. So Tank Dell at captain. I think that I would generally be inclined to play Stroud. I do like to sometimes not play the quarterback when I have a pass catcher in the captain spot. And maybe, Caleb Williams has the Russian upside, so maybe I'll end up taking him up. But let's start with CJ Stroud in there. Let's go to Gerald Everett on the Bears. Who else do I really like here? Rome Odunze, another player I talked about quite a bit. Now we have a lot of money left to play whoever we want. So we've got CJ Stroud in there. Again, I don't think that I want more than one other Texans receiver with CJ Stroud at captain. Or sorry, with Tank Dell at captain instead of CJ Stroud. It gets a little bit thin. Like if I went with Diggs here, then it's if all of these receivers get there, it'd be more likely that CJ Stroud is the best captain. Not necessarily because they can PPR scam their way there, but I think I'd rather go DJ Moore. Now, this is a very balanced build. I've got 3 of each team, but we're leaving 1,300 on the table. So we've got Dell in there with CJ Stroud. We've got Nico Collins in there, DJ Moore, Romo doing this. So we have 3 pass catchers on the Bears now without any quarterback. Maybe I don't like that. Maybe I want to go instead of DJ Moore, go to Caleb Williams. And now I have Caleb Williams double stacked with Odunze and Everett. Then I've got CJ Stroud in there with Tank Dell at captain, Nico Collins in the flex. We're leaving 1,500 on the table. I think this looks like a pretty strong large field tournament. So there's one lineup that, just kind of playing around with it. I think that looks pretty solid to me. I'll try I talked about Caleb Williams, like playing it through Caleb Williams at captain, just full on sliding it. I think is kind of fun. I think it's going to go under owned by the field. Honestly, it shouldn't be super highly owned, to be clear. I don't think it's extremely likely that this hits. But I think you can just do Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, throw in not Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett. 9,500 left over. We've got a full Chicago onslaught with Caleb at captain. You could even throw, I talked about not really loving DeAndre Swift. Maybe that's enough of the onslaught. Maybe now just go, what do I do? Dell and maybe not go Stroud. Maybe hope that they kind of PPR scam their way there. Leaving 1,600 on the table. So this is Caleb onslaught. Houston gets there, maybe 100 yards and a touchdown for Tank Dell. That's the only touchdown that CJ Stroud throws. Nico Collins has, 8 catches for 120 yards. They're the guys, they both outscore CJ Stroud. That's kind of what you're hoping for with this type of lineup. And I think this is viable. Leave 1,600 on the table. You can see a clear path to how this lineup wins. So I think that is a strong large field GPP lineup. All right. We're getting a lot of bots today. Comment Cut says it's only race week mod. I would Thanos snap. Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, maybe I need mods on this channel. I don't know. I haven't had this issue in the past so much. All right, so there's a couple potential lineups. You should draft the primetime slate on Underdog. Yeah, it is kind of fun. I should do that one. I do draft it on my own. All right, let's see other questions. I need to get to my lineups pretty soon. I did actually get a set in before, but I want to update them. So I'm going to just take a couple more questions and then get going to make my lineups. If you're playing a kicker, do you go with the winning team or the losing team because they get stopped and have to kick more? The winning team in general, because the losing team at some point just stops kicking if they're down by too much. So in general, if I go with kicker or captain, I'd rather play it with the winning team, I think. If I send a hat with my NFL themed business logo, will you wear it on live? Probably. I probably would. I have to see the hat. Show me the hat and I'll tell you. So if you want to DM me, you can DM me. Yeah, I agree. The primetime slates are super fun. Hugely enjoy those. Dell is MVP. Yes, like that. DJ Moore captain, like that too. All right. Share your captain. Favorite captain is probably Tank Dell on DraftKings. I play a lot of lineups, but I think Tank Dell is my favorite captain on DraftKings just because he's going to go low owned, allows you to do a lot with your lineup, all that. Okay. I got to get going, guys, because I have very little time left to go make my lineups. Really appreciate all of you hanging out with me, though, for this stream. I had fun. I was super tired coming in. Honestly, I feel revitalized after this stream. Felt good talking through this slate. I think it's an interesting one. I think there are a lot of angles to it. Hope you all win some money tonight. I haven't mentioned this on past streams. I do have a Discord. If you feel like joining the Flannelverse Discord, it is in the description of this video. It's a lot of fun. We talk through, DFS, best ball, all that kind of stuff. So if you are into talking about that stuff, you can join the Flannelverse Discord. The link is in the description of this video. Thank you for some reminders in chat. Yes, please do like the video if you have not already done so. Of course, subscribe to the channel, trying to grow this channel, still pretty small at this point. Appreciate all of your support. Thanks, guys, and good luck tonight.